area, we would reach out to your hero, your heroine, Emily Post, but sadly, she's no longer with us. Somebody who is with us is Kurt Couchman. He's Senior Fellow in Fiscal Policy for Americans for Prosperity, because this is a time to be engaged. We can't be on the sidelines. We got to be in the fight, and Americans for Prosperity is a tremendous organization fighting the good fight. Kurt, we got a lot to talk about. Boy, what a week, another week coming up. But one piece of bad news for the American people that has gotten very little coverage was the Fitch ratings downgrade of our U.S. debt rating. We had the highest rating, AAA, to AA+. Walk us through that, Kurt, because I know you guys at AFP are all over this. Who is Fitch Ratings, and why should we care?
Sure, and Mike, thanks for having me with you today. It's great to be here.
You bet.
So Fitch Ratings is one of the three major ratings agencies. They look at both governments and the private sector to determine creditworthiness, how likely they are to pay back what they've borrowed, primarily from the public, but otherwise as well. And so for them to downgrade U.S. federal debt is a pretty significant thing. It means that the federal government's finances are not as rock solid as they were previously thought to be, and not as rock solid as they should be. That's a problem because the U.S. dollar, or really U.S. debt, is the foundation for most of the global financial sector. And of course, given our U.S. military footprint, we're also the guarantor of a big chunk of the world's population security, not only Americans. There's some discussion about whether that's appropriate, but for now that is the case. So there are real potential problems for regular Americans as well. Higher interest costs for the government means that more and more taxpayer dollars are being put towards just servicing the debt rather than providing goods and services that people need. And then as more and more money is borrowed, that crowds out private sector economic activity, which could slow opportunity and productivity, and also push up interest rates for private sector borrowers.
You know, every day, Kurt, I'm talking to Americans who are anxious, who are frustrated. We have this real strange contradiction where the Biden administration is bragging about Bidenomics as if things are going great in America. And every day I'll hear from people, you know the Nextdoor app. Have you ever seen the Nextdoor app where communities, neighbors post things about, there's noise in the neighborhood or the dog is out or whatever? Every day on the Nextdoor app in the community that I live in Florida, you got people saying, I need help. I'm broke. I can't pay the rent. I've been evicted. I've got a 3-year-old child. I'm a single mom. I went to the grocery store today and I couldn't afford groceries. I mean, this is very, very real. And I know that Americans for Prosperity is all about solutions. There are fixes that can be done. I know we got to turn, unfortunately, to Washington, D.C. We got to talk about governance. And I want to talk with you about incentives for better governance on the fiscal side to try to help get us out of the mess that we're into. What would start, of course, it would look like starting with a real budget. How, Kurt, can Congress deal with the budgeting process now? And what is Americans for Prosperity saying we should be doing that we're not?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest problem with the way that the federal government budgets is that Congress does not have a budget. Their budget process is really 12 appropriations bills that altogether cover only 27% of spending. That's what they do every year. Occasionally, they'll do this thing called budget reconciliation, which is supposed to look at all the rest of spending and also revenue, but it's really kind of, pick and choose your own adventure, and typically ends up increasing the deficit rather than decreasing it. So what we're advocating for is for Congress to do a real budget, a comprehensive budget that actually has everything in it. That way you can get all the committees involved in building the annual budget, applying their expertise to putting it all together, and then you get all the members involved as well. I'm a big fan of an aphorism that idle hands are the devil's playthings. So the more members you can get involved in something productive, the more you're hopefully distracting them from other things that are less productive. And then if you had everything all together, you can start kind of chipping away at problems from year to year instead of having to hold out for a once in a generation kind of deal. Big incentive shift. what it would create.
Incentive, and the incentives is everything, because incentives can often determine an outcome. Behavior is determined by incentives. What incentives can we create or impose on Congress to help facilitate these changes? Let's kind of double down on this. The current path is certainly not sustainable. We got to look at future downgrades, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we don't fix what we're doing right now, we are going to end up in an even worse position where we'll have slow growth or maybe even stagnation like Japan has had for the last 30 years. We could have a debt crisis like Greece had, but it could be much, much worse. I mean, who can bail out the United States? The answer is no one. So we do have to fix this. And it's kind of a three-part strategy. One is fixing the policy, the incentives facing members of Congress just from the rules that guide them. Second is getting Americans to call on their legislators to actually do the right thing, fix the system and also fix policy. And then third, we need to get some better policymakers. You mentioned Joe Biden, or President Biden, I should say, and Bidenomics. And boy, oh boy, it's taxing, it's spending, it's borrowing, and it's not good for everyday Americans. We've got to do something different, but we're not going to with the President Biden. We need a new president. We need better members of Congress, and then they need to be working in a better environment.
Kurt Couchman is our guest, Senior Fellow of Fiscal Policy at AFP, Americans for Prosperity, a tremendous organization. I mean, you guys, you're flexing your grassroots muscle, taking these facts to the American people to set the record straight, and I encourage everybody to get engaged with Americans for Prosperity. You can go to prosperityispossible.com, learn the facts about inflation, and join this movement. And I want to, if you don't mind, Kurt, let's talk a little bit about how everybody listening can get engaged with Americans for Prosperity. It's as simple as going to prosperityispossible.com, prosperityispossible.com, because after all, Kurt, AFP is the ultimate grassroots organization.
That's right. We're the biggest national grassroots organization in the United States. We have active chapters, I think, in 37 or 38 states now, and then we have people working in all the other states in addition to that. So you can go as well as to as well as to the website that you mentioned. You can go to americansforprosperity.org, and there's a drop down where you can get information about specifically what's going on in your state. We have Facebook and Twitter accounts for each of our state chapters. I think we have Instagram. I'm not a user of that platform as much, but we're out there in the communities. We're training grassroots people. We are working with state and local and federal officials to drive better policy, and then there's also some political activities to try to get better officials in place across the government that we have.
Kurt, I'm grateful for the work you and Americans for Prosperity is doing. You keep fighting the good fight. Again, prosperityispossible.org or americansforprosperity.org, prosperityispossible.com, prosperityispossible.com. Find Americans for Prosperity, AFP. Kurt, thanks very much for spending some time with us here on the Mike Gallagher Show.